Aloha guys, this is Kevin Fung with Blue Planet Surf. Today we're going to be giving you a little tutorial about how to choose the best SUP paddle for your needs. The bottom line and most important factor to remember when picking out a paddle is user preference is probably one of the most influential things to consider. But Robert Stehlik, our founder and CEO, and some of the guys here at the shop over years and years of experience with paddles, we've kind of narrowed the focus to some basic guidelines that you can leverage on how to choose a paddle. The two major factors that you want to consider when picking out a paddle is the height of the paddle and then also the surface area of the blade or the size of the blade. In general, they kind of work similar to gears of a car or gears of a bike. If you have a taller paddle and a bigger blade, it's going to be like having a higher gear. It's going to allow you to generate a better top speed while sacrificing the ability to generate acceleration. Whereas if you do the opposite, if you have a shorter paddle and a smaller blade, it's going to be like being in a lower gear where acceleration is going to be much more efficient, but you do got to sacrifice the top speed. Other things to remember are the cadence that you're using when stroking. If you have a smaller blade, you can get a higher cadence going because the blade can pull through the water a lot faster. Whereas if you have a bigger blade, you're going to have to decrease your cadence or the repetitions of stroke because you have more surface area on the blade, which means the paddle is going to pull slower through the water. Paddles originally were designed and kind of based off the outrigger canoe paddles with just an extended shaft. That's really where the stand-up paddling industry kind of was birthed from. And over time, the stand-up industry has come to realize that we need to decrease the blade size relative to outrigger canoe paddles, as well as shortening the height of the paddle relative to what some of the first stand-up paddles that you saw on the market were.
Aloha, I'm Robert Stehlik with Blue Planet, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the paddle length and the blade size and so on, and what I personally use and what I recommend to others. This is my personal paddle. This is what I use for like racing and all-around use. For surfing, I'll use a little bit shorter paddle. But mine, if I fully reach over my head, it comes to kind of below where my wrist is, or my watch even. But maybe a shaka sign, or a little bit less, maybe a thumb and a fist over my head, kind of about that length is where it comes out to. So, and I just find it a little bit shorter. It's just easier on my shoulders. It allows me to keep my elbow a little bit lower, below my elbow, keep my elbow below my shoulder, which reduces the stress on my shoulders. So, and then also just more power, more acceleration when your top hand is a little bit lower. Another important aspect to consider too is the thickness of your board. You know, like when you're stand-up surfing and you're kind of into high-performance stand-up surfing boards, you're going to have a really low-volume board, which means your feet are either at water level or maybe even a little bit below water level. If you have a really low-volume board where it's kind of sinking, you're going to be really low to the water. So, and then also if you kind of have your knees pretty bent to get more balance, so that means you're kind of a lot lower to the water than when you're standing on like a tall stand-up paddle race board with thick rails. You're going to be several inches higher off the water. So you have to take that into consideration. So when you're using a fat race board, you're going to need a longer paddle than if you have like even a race board that has a really sunk deck where you're at water level. It can mean like several inches of difference in terms of height off the water. The acceleration to catch a wave is going to be easier with a shorter length paddle. So guys have been going as short as like head high, even forehead high with the paddle length. I like mine still a little bit overhead, and I think maybe a couple inches over my head is what I use for surfing now. So it's real personal preference. In terms of paddle blade size, like, you know, for shorter distance races, a bigger blade works well because you can just put more power on the blade. But as you get into longer distances, it's nice to have a smaller blade because it feels less fatiguing. You know, like Kevin was saying, you can have a higher cadence and keep it going at a comfortable speed without just exerting yourself too much. And you know, and having a smaller blade, as long as it's a good efficient blade and you get a nice catch and you're patient on the pull without slipping the blade, you know, without cavitating the blade, you can actually get quite a bit of power even on a very small blade. But we found, generally speaking, most people have been moving down to smaller blade sizes and shorter shafts, you know. It's easy. And then another thing that helps if you have like bad shoulders and stuff is using a flexible shaft. A flexible shaft basically will reduce the impact of the paddle on your joints and stuff. The downside I found on the flexible shafts is that you do lose some energy. Like basically when you plant the paddle and your first part of the pull kind of goes into bending the shaft. You know, you get some of it back at the end of the stroke when that flex releases again. But really where you want the power is up front with a strong catch. And so personally, I like to use a stiffer shaft. I find this stiffness gives me more performance. So, you know, most beginners go usually with an adjustable paddle, which is real convenient because you can change the height, which is, you know, it's a nice feature. Also, if you're sharing it with other people and you want to be able to let your wife use it or some kids or whatever, and then you can just change the height and have it at whatever height you need it at, you know. So it is a nice feature to have, but there are disadvantages of the adjustment system, obviously. So, you know, if you're serious about paddling, you want a nice paddle, just getting a fixed length paddle is always the best way. Now, some of the downsides of the adjustment systems are usually you have like a bulky adjustment thing that, so sliding your hand up and down the shaft doesn't really work. You have to kind of let go and grab the handle, whereas on a smooth shaft you can just kind of, when you're switching sides, you can just slide your thumb up and catch the handle on the other side, you know. So it makes switching sides easier if you don't have this. The other thing is it obviously adds weight, and then also there's like two shafts together for part of the way, so it changes the flex of the paddle. It creates weak spots where the paddle can break easier. You know, the adjustment system, you have to kind of wash it out. Water can get in, you know, there can be corrosion. So there's a lot of downsides. But when you're starting out, having an adjustment system is nice because it gives you a chance to experiment with different heights. So, you know, if you're not sure what your personal preference is, it's good to have a paddle that you can change the height on. Basically, there's differences in the shape of, you know, basically the power face. And the power face is the side that basically pushes the water when you're paddling. So this one, the Kealoas are fairly flat. They just have like a flat surface. And the advantages of a flat surface is that basically the water hits it and it can't really escape. It just kind of grabs the water really well. But what happens if your stroke is a little bit less than perfect and you got a little bit of an angle, all the water will try to rush off to one side of the blade. And so that results in, you know, if you don't start the stroke really accurately, it tends to flutter. Basically, it wants to go side to side. But it's probably the most efficient. Like, this is very efficient because it grabs the water really well. Also, when you go in and out of the water, the paddle basically goes in, slices into the water sideways when you enter it or exit it. So a flat surface will have the least amount of friction when you're sliding through the water sideways. So for also for, you know, if you're surfing and you just want to skim the paddle, having a flat surface to skim on, or, you know, going in and out of the water, having no features at all in the paddle makes it basically very efficient. So those are the advantages. But for comfort, having at least some kind of dihedral or some kind of profile in the face makes the paddle a lot smoother. Basically, it reduces the amount of flutter, so it doesn't try to wander side to side and bang into your rail and so on. By having like a little bit of a raised part in the middle that kind of directs the water left and right a little bit, it makes the power phase much more smooth, you know. So it allows you to pull the paddle straight back without a lot of side to side flutter. So I don't know how well you can see it, but this Kinalu paddle has like a light dihedral. It's kind of rounded off, but it basically kind of splits the water a little bit. The disadvantage is that instead of a flat blade that just grabs all the water, this one will kind of push the water a little bit to the side, and you'll lose a little bit of energy in terms of the amount of water that stays on the blade itself. Our Kaizen paddle has a really defined strong dihedral in the power phase, and so, you know, it's almost kind of like pointy, but it is also concave on either side. So the idea is to really keep the power phase very smooth and powerful, but you know, the sides are flat, so we're trying not to lose too much water running off the side of the power phase. Basically, that's the idea. And then this, basically when you're pulling the paddle through the water, this is the air and this is the water, because you want to get the whole blade underwater. So this part we found is really important for performance. We make this really smooth and kind of streamlined, and that allows the paddle to basically that intersection between the water and the air. You want to avoid having any turbulence there, because the turbulence is what creates air bubbles, and then those will flow down the back of the paddle and create more slippage. So by making this part really streamlined, we find it's really improves the hold of the paddle. You don't it doesn't slip as easily. And then we have a little V in the top, basically a single concave. So it basically goes from a single concave into a double concave. And this single concave in the tip and the kind of a pointy tip in the very top allows the paddle to kind of enter, break the surface tension easily, go into the water easily, and then kind of get a nice grab in the water right away. So as soon as you enter the paddle, it kind of grabs the water, kind of like when you put your hand into the water, like when you're swimming, use the hand to kind of grab the water, but also your whole forearm to kind of pull on the water. And that's a little bit the concept behind this. Is kind of like the hand, and then this is your forearm, which gives you really smooth power. Another really important feature of a good paddle, is the weight, So a carbon paddle will definitely be a lot lighter than a fiberglass paddle, which is lighter than a aluminum paddle, generally speaking. So the weight of the paddle is super crucial, because I always tell people, like, when you're paddling, the board's sitting in the water, so you can't really feel the weight of the board very much, and it slightly affects the performance. But a light board is nice, but a light paddle you feel with every stroke, because you're lifting it up. At the end of every stroke, you have to lift up that paddle. So every ounce of weight that you save will reduce the amount of power or energy you need to lift up that paddle. So over an hour, if you take 1,000 strokes an hour, even if it's 1 ounce difference, that's 1,000 ounces in an hour, and 2,000 in 2 hours. So that's a lot of extra weight that you're not lifting up every stroke, So it really adds up. But at the same time, you also, some paddles are really made too light, and if you're a strong paddler, they break easily. So you don't want something that just breaks. You want a good combination of weight and strength. So the strength is really important as well. The other thing I want to talk about is some of the features like ABS edges. Some paddles will have a built-in ABS edge, which is like this white part you see here. It's like a plastic inserted into the blade that makes it stronger and reduces the amount of chipping. Like carbon fiber is kind of brittle, so it'll chip easily if you hit a rock or a reef. So this ABS edge makes the paddle a lot stronger. Also, what's inside the blade matters. Like, there's different kinds of foams that are used inside the blade. There's PU foam and there's PVC foam. So there's big differences in quality. Another personal preference item on paddles is like the shape of the shaft, So what you want to do is kind of match your hand size and your preference to the shaft. So there's different kinds of shapes of shafts, like rounded or oval and tapered. Those are just a few. Like this one is oval and tapered and has like a smaller diameter than this one, which is round. So depending if you have smaller hands or your personal preference is a smaller shaft, these smaller oval shafts will feel more comfortable in your hand. I have big hands, but I still like the smaller diameter oval shafts. It's more comfortable. It's less. It takes less gripping than a bigger. Like, I feel like on a bigger shaft, my fingers work harder to hold it. So another thing that impacts both the blade size and the shaft size is the weight and strength of the paddler. So a stronger paddler will be able to handle a bigger blade, more powerful blade, versus a lighter person or a kid or a petite woman will be better off with a smaller blade, kind of matching the strength and weight of the person. And same with the shaft size. A bigger shaft for a bigger hand, stronger paddler, smaller, thinner shaft for someone with smaller hands. Another impact of not just the materials but also the shape is an oval shape like this one will make the paddle more rigid in the lengthwise direction. So having an oval shaft will make it more rigid versus a round shaft, which has, generally speaking, more flex. Carbon makes the paddle a lot stiffer than using fiberglass. So if you want something with a lot of flex, a fiberglass shaft will be a little bit heavier but offers a lot more flex, which is also, generally speaking, stronger than carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is very stiff and strong, but at some point it gets brittle and will crack. If you bend it too far, it'll just break, versus fiberglass will just keep bending, and doesn't break as easily. It's not as brittle. All right, so I hope you enjoyed these little tips on choosing the best paddle for you, and I hope to see you on the water soon. Aloha.